Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today's a Q&A episode, and I have 3 questions I want to dive into. But first, before I do that, I just want to go over a few ways you can help support the podcast. So first, if you have found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. Again, we want to try to reach more people, and so leaving these ratings and reviews really goes a long way and helps out. Again, appreciate everybody who listens to this, but again, that help is always helpful. Next, I have my free masterclass on body recomp, what it is, how to do it. So I go over the ins and outs of body recomp. If you're in a good spot, if you're not, the link to that is in the show notes. Again, this is completely free. Next, I have my nutrition periodization masterclass. Same thing. I go over it, go over each phase, common mistakes, adjustments, how to set it up, everything like that. And so again, the link to that is in the show notes as well there. Next, if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, and that's where I'm most active on social media. So if you have any questions, maybe something didn't make sense, just reach out to me on there. Or if there's any particular episode that you might be looking for or that might fit your needs best, reach out to me. Would be more than happy to help you out there. With that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So the first question I have is, what's the importance of showing up over the long haul versus following your plans to 90% plus accuracy? And I definitely think there is something to this, right? Definitely something to just showing up consistently over nailing everything to a T. I see this time and time again with clients where they come in with this like perfection mindset, which I think I do think the perfection mindset is a cop out, right? It's an excuse. But I see people come in with this kind of perfection mindset of, hey, I'm starting coaching, or hey, I'm doing this thing and I need to nail it to a T. And if I don't, I'm wasting time. But really, at the end of the day, like, when that happens, what you'll inevitably see happen with these people is they stay on it for short bursts and then they eventually fall off. So it ends up being 100% on, very off, boom, and it's just cycle, right? So you end up being maybe 50%, maybe you end up being 0% at the end of the day. Maybe you see a little bit of progress, but it's really slow and it's just not sustainable, right? That's definitely not the way to go. So I definitely think that there is something to just showing up, being consistent, right? Over long periods of time, whether that be fat loss, muscle gain, body comp change, health, like finding things that help you stay in it long term and that you can stay consistent with really go a long way. When it comes to like people building muscle, the people that have the best physiques and most muscle, yeah, I'm sure they've improved their training. I'm sure they have found some strategies that work best for them. But at the end of the day, they have showed up consistently day over day for years on end, right? And there definitely is something to that. And when I get a new client, I'm really trying to push them to like, what's the most consistent I can get you over extended periods of time, right? Because that's ultimately what we're looking for. For some people, that's a 60% accuracy with things, right? Again, are you going to see the best returns on that? No, that 60% over time is going to be better than this like trying to go 100% and then you end up being 0% more times than not, right? But I will say people can take this too far, right? I mean, if you're only doing say 10% accuracy, you are shooting yourself in the foot here, right? I think with consistency, people end up kind of just showing up and just going through the motions. And it can definitely lead to that, to where it's, yeah, you are staying consistent, but now you're just going through the motion. So is that the best either? So again, it's finding this happy medium of maybe we have periods of time where you are closer to 80 to 90%. And then we have periods of time where maybe you're closer to 60 to 80%. You're never getting under 50 and you're definitely never letting it get to zero. And then again, maybe for some people, they're at 100% for some period of time. It's really hard to be over 90%, I feel. And again, 90% being this arbitrary number of what does that even mean? But you get the picture here of being 90%, you're pretty much doing everything. There's like maybe 1 or 2 things that aren't great. But again, you're also not letting those be zero either. I think that's the other thing that we want to take into consideration here is not only do we want this overall consistency, but you never want like one thing to also be 0% either, because anytime you multiply by zero, it ends up being zero, right? So you want to make sure that, so for example, let's say you're 90%, but the one thing that you're lacking is sleep. If that's at 0%, that's really going to hamper everything, right? So you need to be careful with that. You never want any one variable to be absolutely at zero, right? Again, maybe you have some that you're stronger in, some that you're not, but again, none of them are at zero. At the end of the day, we want to find that happy medium between being consistent, but also being somewhere between 75 to 90% most of the time there with that. Again, some people love this stuff and they'll be above 90% for very long periods of time. Those people will see great results. Again, for some people, maybe it's 60 to 75% for extended periods of time. And then again, maybe you also periodize it a little bit where certain periods of time you're closer to 90 and certain periods of time you're closer to 60 to 70. But again, we're never letting that get too low there with that. Definitely something to it, but and I do think it's way more important than being 100%, but we can take that too far. And we want to make sure that we're striking that kind of balance there with that. All right. I thought that was a great question again, because I do think consistency gets taken the wrong way in that two ways, right? One, consistency gets taken as you need to be 100% all the time, or like that's consistency, right? You're 100%. Consistency is not being 100% all the time. You're just never letting it get to zero. But then I think consistency also gets messed up in that you need to be you can't you end up just going through the motions as well too, right? So we need to be careful there with that. Man, I really struggled to get that second thought out. I had to hit pause on this recording 2 or 3 times to get that out. Anyways, let's go on to the next question there. This is random and off topic, but it is funny what I have found out with podcasting, especially more so happens when I'm interviewing guests, but you can just tell how some of this stuff is mental, right? So in that specific example, I kept being like, oh, why do I keep forgetting this? And then you just keep going back to that. And then you end up not thinking, it like ends up derailing you. And your best thing to do, take a deep breath, think it through. It's okay. Wow, that was my thought. I just was totally overthinking that. Anyways, that's a side tangent there. All right. So let's go to the next topic here. So tips for returning to training after a week of no training. So I would say the biggest thing that I would just avoid here is like, just ramping up your volume and training super close to failure. Whether this was a planned week of no training or an unplanned week of no training, either way, like we need to ease back into it. You probably don't want to go straight into the volumes you were doing before. You definitely want to ease back into it from an intensity technique. 2 to 4 RAR and moderate amounts of volume. So let's say somebody's training, they're doing 4 sets of an exercise, they take a week off, the next week they take that week off and then they get back. We're probably thinking anywhere from 2 to 3 sets for that exercise, right? Start there and then slowly increase it. Biggest reason is like one of the main predictors of injury is big spikes in volume, right? So if doing anything and you go to these massive amounts of volume, then that's where you're going to see an increased risk for injuries. Again, we want to be on the lookout for that. What I'll say on this, that's if someone has like a pre-planned kind of week off. But what if you're someone who had an unplanned week off and you're feeling crappy about that? What do you do? This is the like perfect storm of, oh, I'm going to go in, make up for lost time and really get after. In that situation, we definitely don't want to do that. We want to ease back into it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this with clients where, again, they had a bad week. They weren't able to make the gym. Something came up and they just fell off plan for the week. They try to go back. I'm going to train 6 days this week. I'm going to go super hard. I'm going to really push it. And again, that's a bad idea because this leads to this like kind of all or nothing thinking, also going to spike up your injury risk. And you're probably just going to end up doing more volume than your body can even tolerate anyway. So you're just wasting your time and you're increasing injury risk for no reason. Again, you're better off just easing back into it versus going straight at it. Again, you're not going to get everything out of it that you could, and you're going to increase injury risk. So again, we want to just ease back into it. So that's how I would manage that. Again, not much that we need to dive into on this because those would be my suggestions is just ease back into it. And yeah, that's it for that one. All right. So this next one, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on and dive into it a little bit deeper, but it's, if trying to lose weight, is it better to choose fruits and veggies instead of, in this post, they put like bagels and like bread and stuff like that. And so my thought on this, so obviously they're asking about carbohydrates. So generally, yes, that's good advice, right? Like you should mostly choose fruits and veggies over that stuff, over bagels, bread, most of the time. Okay. Again, if you're just going to make a blanket statement, yes, I would do that. But as with everything here, we need to go into it just a layer deeper and look at it. So it also depends. If you're always super low on carbs, already consuming a lot of fruit and veg, and have some calories to work with, then we could consider adding in those types of carbs, right? I feel like this is coming from that, hey, should I eat this or should I not eat that? And I'm never going to tell somebody yes or no. It really depends on the context. So those would be some specific examples there of when I would include those types of carbs or if I would or wouldn't. So again, on the flip side, if you're someone who's consuming a lot of carbohydrates, you're not consuming a lot of fruit and veggie, and you don't really have many calories to work with, you're also like pretty hungry, we're probably going to dial back on things like bagels and bread and stuff like that. Okay. So again, it's very context dependent on that. And so what I want to do is move into this concept around carbohydrates, right? Just because, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go Because when a lot of people come to me, it seems like carbs still, there's this kind of like mindset around carbs that, hey, they're not great. If you want to lean out, you really need to cut them out. And again, that is true to an extent, right? Obviously, if we're trying to drop some weight, drop body fat, our calories need to come from somewhere. We need to drop calories from somewhere, and carbohydrates are usually low hanging fruit there that we can, no pun intended, that you can take away some calories there, right? From that standpoint. But I see this taken too far where now that's like how people always think. And they also just really try to shy away from carbohydrate sources, even in a fat loss diet. Okay. And so again, I want to switch this to why I don't like to go low carb if someone's trying to improve their body composition, right? They're trying to build muscle, maintain muscle, and trying to drop body fat. And again, this is going super low carb here on this. All right, so the first is training is going to suck, right? Carbs are the primary fuel source for higher intensity training. Without carbs, you are likely to experience decreased performance and a quicker time to fatigue during workouts. This is why generally when you are cutting, you probably feel like you just can't do as much. You just don't feel as great in your training, right? You're just going to fatigue quicker. So this obviously leads to less effective training sessions and slower progress in the gym. And I find the same thing when I have lower carbs, I just gas out much quicker. I'm not able to do as much overall. Carbs are also stored as glycogen in muscles, which is crucial for sustained physical activity. And low glycogen levels can lead to premature fatigue and reduce power output, leading to less muscle growth over time. So again, in the context of a fat loss phase, we're still trying to maintain muscle. So if we're having, we're not, our training sessions aren't going to be the thing that causes the fat loss, but it is going to help us maintain our muscle. And if we're just constantly super low carb, our glycogen levels are super low, it's going to be really hard to push our training enough to where you may even potentially risk losing muscle because you're just so fatigued if your carbohydrates are absolutely too low in that process. Now, if we're talking from a muscle gain perspective, low carbohydrates really going to hurt you in that process, and you need to make sure you're eating at least enough carbs there with that. Second, low energy, inadequate carbohydrate intake can lead to reduced overall vitality and cognitive function, and this can show up as lethargy, irritability, and concentration difficulties. This can significantly impact daily life and work performance, while also impacting the consistency and effectiveness of any training and nutrition protocol. So this is why when you really cut out all your carbohydrates, you really start to feel like crap throughout the day as well too. Carbs increase recovery, so they're crucial for overall recovery. They not only replenish muscle glycogen and reduce soreness post-workout, but they also spare protein for muscle repair. They support hormonal balance. They enhance immune function and improve sleep and mental well-being. And this creates a better environment for overall and physical recovery, right? So they're great for the recovery side of things. This also makes sure protein does its job. Getting enough carbohydrates ensures that protein is going to do the job that it needs to do, right? I mentioned it helps spare protein. So carbohydrates have a protein sparing effect, meaning when you eat enough carbs, your body's less likely to break down protein for energy. And this allows dietary protein to be used effectively for repair and growth, right? So those are the main reasons why we want to make sure we get in plenty of carbohydrates. So what about how much? What does this mean? Again, this is going to depend on your goal. So if you're in a fat loss phase, you're in a recomp phase, you're in a muscle gain phase, that's obviously going to impact it. And so is your overall caloric intake, just because, again, protein, carbs, and fats make up your calories. So when your calories are lower, say you're in a fat loss phase, you're going to need you're going to, as a byproduct, most likely have less carbohydrates, right? That's carbs and fats are usually the ones that we're going to decrease there with that, in terms of when we say we're at maintenance and then we go to a calorie deficit, we're gonna cut out some carbohydrates, most likely with that. But in saying this, I try to keep carbs no lower than 1 gram per pound of body weight. And again, this may change depending on client's body weight, depending on what their calories need to get to. Say they unfortunately just really adapt to fat loss and they have to eat 1,200 calories to drop weight. So it's going to be pretty hard to get that 1 gram per pound of body weight. However, people that need to go down to 1,200 calories also generally have lower body weights, so they also can get away with less grams there with that. But again, it really does depend on where you're at. In a fat loss phase, if someone has to go super low, unfortunately, we may not always be able to keep it at 1 gram per pound of body weight, but that's the minimum that I'm looking at outside of a fat loss phase. However, in most situations especially outside of a fat loss phase, I am going to recommend much more than this. And again, it really is going to depend on, from there, it's okay, how much. It depends on your calorie intake, how you like your macros to be set up, what your hunger looks like, how your training performance is, and everything as well too, right? Like those are all going to be considerations there with that. So again, how much we ultimately end up having clients consume daily depends on preferences, current results, and their biofeedback. The next thing I want to talk about is carb quality, right? One issue I see with carbs is that people put things high in carbs and fat under the carb category, right? So it's like pizza, ice cream, cookies, anything super tasty. All those foods are high in fats and carbohydrates, right? And typically like added sugar. Obviously, pizza, not, but like ice cream, cookies, it's going to be added sugar. It's going to be high in fat as well, too. And it's that combination that really gets people to overeat and it makes it super tasty. And again, so yes, it has carbs in it, but it's not, I wouldn't consider that a good carb source of food, right? So we need to consider these things carb sources: breads, tortillas, potatoes, rice, oats, fruits, pasta, right? The bulk of those foods are from carbohydrates. So those need to be our what we call carb sources, not cookies, ice cream, and pizza. Yeah, if you cut those out, like you're yes, you're cutting carbs, but you're also cutting out a ton of fats and therefore cutting out a ton of calories as well, too, right? And those foods are tasty, really hard to get satiated on, so they're more likely to be overeaten, right? But again, it has some carbs in it. People are like, oh, that's why I can't have carbs. And it's okay. The calorie density of the food, that's the issue. So let's talk about timing of carbohydrates. Okay. So again, your overall carbohydrate intake for the day is most important. However, there are some benefits to making sure you consume some carbohydrates before and after training. And so lastly, I want to switch to when would you maybe want to have a little bit more carbs around your workout? So for one, if you haven't eaten for 8+ hours, so the longer you haven't eaten beforehand, the more having a little bit of carbohydrate before your workout is going to improve it. Again, your longer workouts, if you have a workout longer than say 45 minutes or so, again, some carbohydrates before your workout may be beneficial from a training performance perspective. You have a higher volume workout. So again, you're doing a lot of sets or something like that, or it's like a really long cardio session. Again, some carbohydrates beforehand may be helpful there. Extra workouts that use larger muscle groups. So again, if we're training legs, maybe we have a little bit more carbohydrate before that workout. How intense the workout is. So obviously the more intense it is, the harder it is, the more you're pushing yourself, some carbs can be helpful there, right? So I just want to go over timing when you may want to have some carbohydrates before you work out. So again, takeaway: while there are times when a lower carb approach may work, again, this would be like if you have low activity levels, low caloric intake for a fat loss phase, maybe this has been recommended by a healthcare professional for any like health reason or something like that, then okay, then, that's fine. We'll obviously do that. But in most cases, I don't recommend a low carbohydrate diet for extended periods of time when the goal is improving body composition, fat loss, and muscle gain for the reasons I mentioned there of that. So hopefully that gives you better kind of insight into this. And I know it was a simple question, but I thought it would be really helpful to really dive into this and why I came to my conclusion of my initial answer of why we may fit it in there with that. So that's it for this episode. If you have any questions on your macros, if you have any questions on anything I went over today, or what what you need to do in terms of, do you need to be in a fat loss phase? Do you need to eat more carbs? Do you need to eat less carbs? That's what my free 30-minute strategy call is for. We dive into what you're currently doing, where you want to go, and how we can bridge that gap. And if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. But if you just have any questions on what I went over today, you can also just shoot me a DM. I'm more than happy to answer. That's it for this episode, and I'll talk to you next time.